So, thank you for the graceful way, Carole, that you started our session this afternoon, and David's presence here and my own it's kind of real pleasure to spend time with you. Carole, you work with the Death Café in Tauranga itself, and you're a Tauranga wahine, you're a lady of courage, and I wondered if we could just spend some time talking about that with you.
About the Death Café in particular?
Well, perhaps about you, kind of. Tell us a bit about when you were first aware of the importance of spirituality and yourself, perhaps in terms of a childhood memory, and then we can go forward from there.
It's interesting, the whole concept of the spiritual awareness, or when I became aware of myself as a spiritual being. When I was studying Interfaith Ministry, we had to write a spiritual journey paper, and we were told that we could start the paper at any point in our spiritual journey, whether it was the last year that we'd been in seminary or whether it was at any point. And I kind of really pondered that and thought, well, when did are they talking about this lifetime? When did my spiritual journey truly begin? And I thought, well, in this lifetime, I suppose it starts from my birth. So I started my journey paper from my birth. And the interesting thing about, and I would really suggest to anybody to sit down and write a paper or a story about their spiritual journey, where they feel it started and where it has taken them, because I gained enormous insights into myself through that process. And so I was born in Taupo on the side of a beautiful ancient lake with a volcano. So I think that says something about the energy of the person, because I've come from that land, from that place and space. And my earliest memory is of Jesus when I was about 5 years old in the hallway of my house. And I saw him, beautiful, luminous being, and felt enormous love. And so I told my mother, as you do at 5, and she said, oh, rubbish, that wasn't Jesus. And of course, I never saw him again, because I think it did close down that part of me. And I think that is very probably common in that sort of childhood that I had, in that we're talking in 70s in New Zealand, where a lot of things were it's just the way they know it, and I don't blame my mother in any way for that. It's just her reaction to the situation. I was a pretty wild child. I loved to go outside and talk to fairies and make things and commune with the nature and all of these things, and I think so I was sort of the changeling child that didn't really fit the mould. And then we went to church, of course, as you did in those days, to Sunday school. Well, that was a horrifying experience, because they were talking about Jesus in a way that I had no comprehension of. All of these things that you have to do and shouldn't do, and I couldn't find the love, and I was terrified. So next time Sunday school came round, I was a strong-willed child, so I put my foot down and refused to go, with a lot of screaming and crying, and that was sort of the end of it. And I can see that, looking back when I was writing the paper, I can see that I did the nature, being in nature was my spiritual time. That was my place where I connected with everything that I knew to be true. I sang and danced with imaginary beings, and I think that then what happens around the teenage years, you go into that puberty and everything changes, and that's when I think that things started to go very very differently. I think what a lot of young people do, experimented with drugs, all those other sort of behaviours that come around with adolescence. And then in my 20s I went travelling, and the interesting thing that I realised when I looked at what I had done over all of that time was, I felt that I had somehow or other separated from my spiritual connection, maybe around those teenage years with the drinking and the smoking and the, all of these things. And then I sort of got very much into everyday life, working and doing all of those things, partying and travelling, and somehow or other I'd sort of thought that maybe I'd had a split, and then further on it'd come back together. But when I wrote the spiritual paper, I realised that there was no split, and that the split was actually only what I had imagined. And in fact, at all of that time, I was being guided, even though I wasn't aware of it. And I just remembered back to when I looked at where I travelled. I've been to most of the sacred sites a lot of sacred sites on the planet without even knowing that that's what I was doing. Yeah. So
Spirit is a mysterious force around and through your life, and love is a key indicator for you of its presence.
Yes.
And light.
Yeah. So I think the feeling of love, being the very strong indicator. Yeah.
And you made your journey over the world sites to Tauranga, and you became interested in this area of life that we fight against, death.
Yes.
Would you like to talk a bit more about that?
So it's sort of an interesting thing, because a lot of times people ask me, how did you get to sort of death in the Death Cafe? And to some degree, I don't know that there's one defining moment. I think every path has led me, and all the experiences have wound together, becoming a celebrant, first for marriages, then moving into funerals, aging myself, maturing into life, being unafraid to be with pain. And I think that's one of the things that I've realised with myself, that I can sit with other people in pain, and that's okay. I can sit with that. And it just sort of like a progression somehow happened, that I ended up studying Interfaith Ministry with a leaning towards being very interested in dying and death, and realising that there's a lot of people in the world who are really dying, lonely, sad situations. We've sort of outsourced it as best as we can, especially in the dominant Western culture. We've outsourced it, pushed it away, given it to other people.
Does that mean we haven't loved it?
Well, I don't think we've ever loved it, no. Okay. That's a really nice way of putting it, actually. Okay. Yeah, I think. And in all this outsourcing of death and denying our own death, I think that the planet has become, we've managed to create this problem on the planet as well. I see it all as linked, actually. It's all linked into the same story. And so I've just had started to think, well, what better thing to do than reintroduce people to death and dying, to reintroduce it into the community as something that can be talked about, that's nothing to be feared. I've been talking about death for years and I'm still here. So I don't think I'm that powerful, Like if I was that powerful, if talking about something could make it happen, I should have won lotto by now, there's a million things that I could have talked into being. My death is not being one of them, to date. So
our mythologies, both Māori as tangata whenua of this place, and my own Irish, Scottish, and probably Finnish mythologies talk about women that go through darkness to bring light. They talk about this mythological heroine who journeys into spaces that aren't known in order to bring care or love to her children when they pass through that space. In Māori culture, there's hene nui te pou. I wonder, do you feel you actually are living this heroine, this hero figure, in the sense of restoring what had been broken from human existence, and helping people remember how to love death, their own, you said growing into aging, you age yourself.
Yes.
Do you want to speak anything more about the aging process, perhaps?
Well, I think it's another one of those, it's like multitudes of little deaths, the aging process, and that realising that you can't suddenly do something that you thought, and even you look at yourself, and sometimes I walk past the mirror and go, oh, is that me? Oh, that's right, that's what I look like now, because somehow or other I feel that my spirit feels lighter and younger, yet my physical being is older, and it's kind of quite, I do feel as if I've grown lighter in the energetic spiritual sense, but on the physical sense, obviously I abide by the laws of nature, which we all do. And I think for me that has been one of the because we've separated from nature and we've separated ourselves from the laws of nature, the whole decay and aging, the cyclic nature of what's happening around us. We're now going into winter here. We can see all the dead leaves on the ground. We can see the decaying process, which is going to go down into the earth and create the spring life. But we seem to be focused on the summer and the spring a lot, even with our physical selves, and not a lot on the autumn and the winter. So I would say I'm going into my autumn time of life, to the cronehood. I feel very happy about that on some levels and not on others. Some days I'm good with it, and some days it's a lot less, feel a lot less positive about that. But I think that once again, the death is another part of that, understanding that cycle, and because we don't see it on a daily basis, we're not in touch with that.
So there's something that you spoke about when you did your introduction, which really caught my insight, I suppose, about working into this age, this stage, this human limitations and boundaries, starting when you were born and working out from there. So I guess you've got a sense, I'm guessing that you've got a sense of remembering more than this mortal coil, if you like, and you've got a sense of the transcendence of love. Human love is also a spiritual love. There's something in you that is daring to love back in spite of the negatives of aging yourself. And then can you talk about that at all? Like, so why choose love? Why choose the spiritual compassion that you're generating out in your Death Cafe? Why choose these things?
I think you spoke earlier about the Irish Keening woman, and there's a part of me that feels that in my bones. I feel that I possibly have ancestry of Irish Keening woman in my family history. I had quite a profound experience going to a small island. Once again, was driven there, literally pulled there by a whole set of circumstances that, were extraordinary, to arrive on this small island on the day that a dead person was returning to the island. So as we were getting off the boat, they were bringing a casket off as well, and all the village was gathered there and put him onto a like a horse tray carriage, and then we went to a place out onto the out by the coast, and I basically lost about 3 hours of time where I don't even really know where I went, and so in a meditation sort of situation. So I feel that there's a big part of me that feels this calling, and there's nothing else I can describe other than to say it comes somewhere from within me to bring back that tending woman. What we're tending woman, we tended the births, we tended the deaths. And I feel that I'm not tending the births for the babies, I'm tending the births for the deaths, or tending the midwifing the death is where the call comes from, and I don't have any real knowledge where it comes from other than maybe an insight that it's coming from within me. And I can't not. I think that's possibly been one of the things all of my life, is when I hear these calls that are so strong, it's like I can't not do it. It's impossible not to. Like, I can't not. I don't know how to explain that, because it's innately been something that's driven me all my life, so I don't have any other frame for it.
Place obviously talks with you and directs you and pulls you forward. Place being love, I guess, incarnate, in the sense that there's oxygen and soil and food and warmth, possibly, or cool. you find yourself nurtured in Tauranga, cared for in Tauranga in terms of doing this work, or how do you sustain your spirituality in probably sometimes adverse situations?
That's a very good question. It is quite a difficult, sometimes it does feel a little bit of a lonely place, but once again I usually always turn to nature, because that's always the place where I find the most nourishment. So I walk in the bush, I get right down and press myself onto the earth and wash my hands in the water, often just wash away the day's troubles in the water, bless the water, thank the water, and wash away the troubles. So, and I do have a network of friends that I've met over the years, spiritual mentors and teachers who I can lean into. And the Death Cafe community itself is really starting to knit together really nicely. So there's a great group of people who come regularly to the Death Cafe, and so that's been a really good, and they're often people too that have some working connection with death, be it hospice nurses or people like that. So that's been really good too.
The courage you have, you're not speaking about, but I am feeling that you would be significantly courageous to challenge even the way that we construct society, which you could say is highly in denial of death, just as it is of aging. So older women and men are fairly invisible, and the experience of death, quite outside Māori culture and perhaps Pacifica culture, is incredibly one of a sanitised process that's tidily put away.
Yes.
Whereas the holding of the sitting beside someone dying, they're asking of a health system to move its resources to support you to do that, or support me to do that. The building of richness around someone who's coming to the end of their life, reminding them all of the rich experiences that they'll travel with and how worthwhile their life has been. The capacity to sit with them as pain and chaos maybe descends upon them. You counter all of these in your Death Cafe in the sense that you are encouraging people to hold space, to sit with family members, to trust the wholeness of their lives, yes, and that this is the right time, the right space, and they have the knowing for the journey.
And I think that this is the thing that I love about the Death Cafe model as well, is that one of the things I say at the beginning is that I'm not an expert, and I'm not there to give advice, because death belongs to us all, and in fact we're all experts on it. We all know the process, we all do know it. We just are choosing, because of the way the dominant culture is framing it at the moment, to have outsourced that. But to claim it back, I really believe it's not that, we're not that too far away from it, and all we need is some guidance, some people who are prepared to be way showers, who are prepared to sit and hold our hands and show us and be with us. And for every family that sits with their loved one, that's another 5 or 6 people who will therefore be able to hold another death or in their family. And so I think that the gift of a death in the family, when it is where someone is dying, not in a sudden death, but when somebody is dying and we're sitting there, that is the last great act of love that we can give as the dying person to our family. I see it as a huge act of love. The dying person can teach dying to their family also. If we're just all brave enough just to be with it, we can learn that way also. And that is how we did learn death. We learnt death by having it in our homes, not having it closed up behind closed doors. And we learnt to be with dead bodies by being with them. You know, it's actually, and I don't think we're that far away. In New Zealand, we're actually hugely advantaged, you know, at an advantage here because of the Māori culture. They have gifted us something so special by holding on to their death rights. I
guess working class culture as well, because I remember my grandmother talking about birthing children by tying a rope around the head of her bed and putting something in her mouth so that her screams wouldn't disturb the neighbours, but that she got on with it.
Wow.
And I remember
That's extreme.
describing, because we couldn't afford a doctor, so or a midwife, but also the body of the person who died would be brought home from the fields or the mine or the port and put in the front room with ice packed around it, and you knew as a neighbour or as a woman to get the ice, and you kept the ice going for 3 days, and families knew intuitively, they'll need food, bring or make extra bread or bring cake, and the beer was available, and you spoke to the body,
yes,
and you spoke to the family, and you cried and wailed and suffered for 3 days. I know that also this was a time to talk about the lack of mercy that was shown by one family member to another. The domestic violence was named, or the incest, in the hope that at that point of death also there'd be liberation for the family in some way.
Yes.
In our case, we continued to struggle on a little longer, but eventually we got there in comparison. So I think the role of grandmothers and grandfathers is quite important in passing on what it is to die, what they've witnessed and how they want to be cared for at their death.
And I think that this is, for me, one of the things that I'm noticing now that I find deeply disturbing. And this is there is a generation coming into their dying time who have spent most of their life doing things differently, which has created a lot of great change in the world, which is what we always need. The young ones bring forward everything new and things forward to be re-looked at. But one of the issues that I am seeing coming up is that there's a call for these kind of, they call them, even makes my body go weird, no service cremations, where somebody dies and then they whip them off to the crematorium and cremate them. And then, a couple of days later you have a memorial with a little box of ashes.
Okay.
And I find it deeply disturbing, it's becoming more popular because it's seen as the no fuss, don't make a fuss, don't worry, low cost. Cost comes into it quite a lot, but then there's this no fuss. Put me in a box and just get rid of me, and it's become quite a popular way for people to do things, and I do find it deeply disturbing because once you cremate somebody, you cremate them. There's nothing, there's no being able to say goodbye, and I do feel that being able to be with the person, especially if you're not around when they're dying. A lot of families, people live overseas, so then what happens is you don't get to have that goodbye, you don't get to see them, you don't get to kiss them, or any of those things you may or may not want to do. But I find it quite alarming that this is what is happening. And once again, there's some of it is around, I think, a misheld belief that there will be less grief if we don't have a funeral. But of course, that's not the that of course is not the situation at all. And because I do pastoral care in the community, following up people after funerals, I'm finding that there's more grief, not less grief in these situations. But of course now we've got the horses bolted, for want of a better word. We're already done, we've already cremated the person. And I think the mantra that I would always say in any of these situations is just slow everything right down. The minute something happens, just go into almost snail pace, because a lot of these things are done with haste, and there's no going back. So it's the same almost if you were to wake up in the middle of the night and your husband or wife is dead in the bed next to you. Do nothing. They're already dead. We don't need to call the ambulance. We don't need to call anybody, because the minute we do that, everything changes. So my advice is always just go as slowly, try not to panic. You might panic if you wake up and your husband's dead, but do the very best you can. Go and make a cup of tea, do nothing. Do the very best you can just to slow everything down, because I'm really seeing some people suffering quite substantially now because of some of these rapid fire. And because people go, oh no, well this is a good idea, this is what my cousin did, or...
So they're talking over the intelligence that lies in the actual moment of the soft texture of someone's body as they're dead. But there's an intelligence that comes to us from wiping or stroking the hair or the fluid from their mouth and acknowledging the sanctity of that person's journey. There's an intelligence that comes when you share those experiences with those that couldn't be there, so the storying becomes quite important.
Very important.
They feel woven in then to what they couldn't attend because they were away.
And I think that it is around that when you are with someone and they're dying over a number of days, and it is like you go on that whole journey, and if the family, whoever is there, you're going on that journey together, and I think it changes you, and how can it not?
You have to respect time.
It just changes you, and
yes.
and I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether maybe as a culture we've become frightened of that sort of deep change that comes from that profound experience of being with death, and so there's a fear around it. And now we're just trying to rush it out the door as quickly as possible, and with hope that it won't touch us, that maybe we won't be touched by it. But how can we not be touched by it? And it's one of the reasons that I just love the Death Cafe, because I just want people to know, just talk, just in the back of your mind, just think about it for one little minute, because possibly when the time comes you might choose to do something differently. Don't take the words of what seems to be common knowledge or common speak or what everyone else is doing. To hell with what everyone else is doing. You know, like choose, just think for a little bit on your own. Go there yourself. Don't be frightened. You know?
remember, recenter, and re-understand kind of that. Yeah, this.
And that it's not outside of us to deal with it. We don't need the paramedic or the doctor or the funeral director to arrive right in the immediate moment. A body is perfectly okay to stay with us, you know, for quite some time. It's okay. We can deal. Look, we dealt with babies' nappies. We can deal with a bit of stuff.
So death has invitations in it to enter time, the present moment, in a different way, and that changes our intelligence, almost our neurology, our spirit. It reminds us of something bigger than a work-driven lifestyle, than 12 hours in a working day or similar, or a waking day. We actually become quite transcendent. Time slows down, and the act of love becomes much more a humanly important duty. Duty is the wrong word. Capacity is the right word.
Yes, and I think that the grace that was there when she was dying was enormous.
You could feel it.
You could feel it so intensely, it changed me, of course, and I think that for all of us, that experience is there. For all of us, we just need to be able to just be in there. And
I was just going to ask that, you know, because it is a psychological, spiritual phenomenon, I was wondering if you feel that even if you don't go through that process and you haste the moment of it, I don't think you can actually escape the psychological effects of it, which it has on you anyway, because it's a part of you, right? So that would get like scrambled if you don't kind of give it that time that it needs.
And I think that's what I've been witnessing, is that what happens is that people suddenly these things start happening and they don't have any understanding. It's like, well, I'm at work and I've got this really busy job and I've got this brain that's not there and I can't think straight and I don't know what I'm doing, and suddenly I don't care anymore about anything and I don't understand. And all of this, of course, is a grief reaction, but they just don't have the knowledge of that. That would be what, of course, that would be what would happen. Your mum just died, you know, and next minute, 3 days later, you're back in the workplace trying to make decisions on, you know, on a business level. And I do think the Industrial Revolution and business and the modern, once again, there are many cultures living in the world who do not do this. Our culture, Western culture. You know, it's and I think the Industrial Revolution was the start of it, probably really that Victorian age, and when it really started to separate. Well, quick, you better get rid of the dead so that the living can keep on working. We lost, you know, it's a part when that separation was really starting to happen. One of the really interesting things. A beautiful old Maori man said to me many years ago. We were having a discussion and I asked him about, because at the time I had been to the US and been living on a Native American reservation for some time and really watched their struggle with their culture. And strangely enough, at a powwow there was a guy selling videos, you know, like it was video days. It was a video collection, you know, selling video caravan. Like at the powwow, they have like a market, and they're selling these things. And so we went into the video caravan to see what they had. And strangely enough, they had the movie Once Were Warriors there, and we, being New Zealanders, went, oh, this is a New Zealand movie. He goes, and this guy goes, yeah, it's our biggest seller. We were like, wow, that's so interesting. But I think the title, I don't know that people knew necessarily what it was about, but I think the title, Once Were Warriors, was really appealing to these people. And they had really lost, you know, were really struggling a lot. And I asked a Maori man after I came back, like I said, why do you think the Maori have managed to hold on in some way, hold on more to their culture than maybe what has happened to other Indigenous cultures where there's been, you know, colonialism? And he said, because we never let go of our death rights.
Wow.
And and that is what really, I think that was one of the things that I thought, that's where we've gone wrong. We've forsaken our death rights for the sake of money and work, and so that was another, I suppose it's another inspiration that I feel we need to reclaim them.
Do you feel like that comes from a great separation of, I don't want to say church and state, but kind of the God and divinity away from what is like Western secular culture?
I think that the secular, the starting to become a more secular culture has definitely had an impact, for absolute sure, on that, absolutely sure. We were talking a little bit about that on the way here, about that when things happen and people die, there is nothing to lean into anymore on that if we're coming from that really secular place. And the ceremonies and the rituals that were there to help us through the dying process, so not only through the dying, but also immediately after people died. And then you would have your 3 days, and then there may be people coming to bless the house. Even further along, you might in another 3 months or 6 months, there may have been other ceremonies or other rituals that would have taken place. But now it's just whoop, in, out, get it done.
It's all like become
industrialized. Industrialized.
Yeah, it's like, oh, like someone's died, here's like the chain of companies that you need to, you know.
It's like many of the things I think that we have that have become businesses. Things that were not businesses are now businesses. Health is one of them. Aged care, dying and death, all of these things in our businesses, about
Education.
making education. It's all about making money out of things that were never meant to be businesses. They were never meant to be silos that were, making money. And I don't even think I have words for it, the horror I feel at the thought that they're making money out of caring for old people, because all of that speaks to me is that there's just shortcuts and things not going well.
Because the profit in the end.
Because there's got to be profit.
But if the person's well-being was the measure, then
Yes.
that would be truly more liberating.
Yes, so I think and dying became the dying process. Because once again, we don't even, as a culture, really understand what dying looks like, and that in itself brings up so many horrors for people. People being kept alive well beyond the point where they are really dying, and watching my nana die over a period of time, I saw exactly what that process looks like, and it just gave me a whole different understanding about it, about when we over-medicalise, when we jump in with the medical, and all we're doing is actually not extending life, we're just extending dying. And then we've extended dying to such a point now that people want to be able to choose when they die. It's kind of goes all into that. It's kind of, we've created another business. Now we're going to have the euthanasia business, so we've created the next step business.
So the interruptions interfere with what I think you were speaking about the time and the psychology and human processes. So if you interrupt the time, be it an eternal moment and jump through it into pushing an outcome to happen or a process to happen that's not timely, then in fact you interrupt something of the human psychology.
Yeah.
And so the extending death is also interrupting the time, but also the death industry versus death cafe, which is different. Cafe being more to willingly participate and feed ourselves from the notion, the kaupapa, whereas the death industry is more, I think Stephen Jenkins' words, when I was involved or popular in the death industry, he was a hospice manager. He speaks rather cynically about that experience.
The death trade, he likes to call it the death trade. And yes, he does, he has a plethora of experience and stories involved in there that is so interesting. And was really informed where he is now with that. But I think that is the beauty of the Death Cafe for me, is that we come as a group of people, we're all going to die, we're all human, and that's about as much of an agenda as there is. And then it's just what comes on the day, it's who turns up and what they bring, and every single one is different, and every single time we end up by having the most incredible experience together as a group of people. And people who come were really nervous, because I was so scared. I was standing at the door, I didn't know whether to come in, and they come in, and at the end of it they're glowing, and they leave and they're like, wow, that was really cool, I got to speak about something that I'd been wanting to know about. Yeah.
Because that would also be a psychological process of going through speaking and learning about something like that would have an effect on how you actually perceive it, even if it's a little bit.
And I think for me it's like, and Stephen Jenkinson also talks about this brilliantly as well, it's about exercising your wonder muscle. Just wonder about something, just wonder. And I really like that, and I like the use of the word. It's a great gift from him, and I use that word now sometimes myself. I wonder, because wonderment really opens the door for us to be able to just explore something and just to wonder, well, how can it be different? Or maybe that what I was thinking about, maybe that's not how it is after all. I wonder what would happen if I did this differently. Or
so Aboriginal people, I think, and South African people, I could be wrong, but Aboriginal nation people talk about dreaming forward rather than just dreaming back, because we tend to dream backwards about bits and pieces that have happened. And that in terms
I
of,
like that,
I like
yeah.
that. I'm reading a lot about storylines and song lines that they leave behind. You were talking about psychology. Was there more that you wanted to speak about there?
No, not really. I just wanted your guys' take on this, because it just came to me as you guys were talking. I read this thing, I think it was in The Listener, and it was talking about some book which was on death, but it had a very interesting statement in it, which I never thought about until I heard it. And it said that us human beings like to keep the dead among the living. And it meant that, like, you know, even if like someone's died in war and things like that, you want to see their face, you want to see their body, and you want to like somehow keep them in this world as well, you know. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, because I found that I can't believe it didn't click until I read that statement, but it's true, right? In terms of graveyards and people keep ashes and things like that. Yeah.
And I think that the keeping the dead, but was it humans like to keep the dead amongst the living?
Yeah, amongst us. Like.
Amongst us. So for me, what that means for me is there's the one place that I keep all of my dead is in my heart, and it's the one place where they're always alive. So I think that the having the cemetery or the places to visit is also for me important, because I think that especially in the busy world that we live in, to be able to go and pay respects somewhere, to actually stop my busy day, whatever day that is, and to actually make the pilgrimage, make the journey, to lay the flowers and bring the honour. Now, a lot of people I talk to couldn't care less about that. They go, no, I don't care, look, throw the ashes off the Tauranga Harbour Bridge, I don't care, or whatever it is that they feel that they want, and they don't want to do that. So it's kind of interesting, because I think that probably deep-seated in all of us, that is a truth. But for a lot of people, it's not now no longer a truth on one level. There are funeral homes, you wouldn't believe how many funeral homes have cupboards and cupboards full of unclaimed ashes. Now those ashes are the bones of their ancestors. That's the bones of your ancestors sitting somewhere in a cupboard, unclaimed, because now people don't even know what to do with them. So and there's hoodoo voodoo, we don't want ashes in the house because Dad might haunt us, or there's all of these things that so they kind of stay in this weird limbo space as well. And for me, that statement is true. I want to keep the dead with me, but in the sense that I keep them alive within my own heart, and by the memories of them, doing some of in honour of them, doing some of the things that they do, or bringing forward some of their traits. That's for me how I keep the dead with me. But I don't know what you're.
Oh, right. As you were speaking, I was thinking about how there's a fine line between sanity and insanity in terms of the notion of our spirit. And people, I certainly know I struggle to understand my own spirituality and be considered still, or be sure that I would not be considered insane, because I grew up in a period of time where certainly highly intelligent, my mother's generation of highly intelligent women and writers were not infrequently placed in psychiatric units because they were considered dysfunctional. And yet, in fact, they were only truly speaking about women's liberation issues that came up later in the 1970s. So, but the sense of a spiritual connection to the loved ones who have passed on, and to the ground in which people's bodies have been buried and massacred and fought over, is something that's been part of my intelligence most of my life. So I have, all of my life. I grew up in the Waikato, and I always wondered why I had such aching pain, and I realised it's actually because of the massacres upon the land in which we lived. But no one told the stories of those until I became an adult. Then I understood, and I felt very free then. But the body has its own great intelligence, and our spirit is part of that. So I agree with what you say, and I'm believing also that human beings were also quite timeless as well as timely, and that part of me exists because of people who've gone before me, and people who will come after me. I'm very aware of the incredible beauty of seeing my grandchildren, not because they're mine. My life is a means by which they can come into existence, and I often cry when I see them, not because I'm sad, but because of the profound beauty of what life is, and what death is. My death will come, but they will live, and they too will die. So am I answering you?
Yeah.
Yeah, was that what you were sort of... I don't know whether we went off into a different tangent altogether.
It's okay.
I just wanted to engage some dialogue, so that was good.
But one of the things, at the last moment, the very last vision that I saw of my Nana lying in her casket, and I bent down to kiss her goodbye the one last time, just before we closed the lid on the casket. And one of the things, as I realised when I really looked at her lying there, was I just thought to myself, there's it doesn't matter when we leave. This is it. We're all in a casket. We're all just going to be in a casket. We've got nothing with us. It doesn't really matter what we had materially in our lives, because the only thing that we are leaving behind is what we leave in somebody else's heart. And that's when I knew my grandmother had gifted us, because she was an incredibly loving woman, that she had gifted us the most enormous love, and she also gifted us her death. And so it really was that moment of realisation when that lid goes on that casket, that, what we're leaving behind is what we leave in somebody's heart. That's where the memory is, and
I was just going to say, in the same vein, in terms of values, how you spoke about the bones of someone's ancestors sitting in someone's cupboard. That is like a major change in values in terms of how indigenous cultures treat their ancestors. It's like ancestors are a big deal, and are seen as part of that kind of generational inheritance, which is kind of completely,
Yeah, no, it blows people's... It blows your mind. The first time I saw it, I was so shocked, because I just could not believe it's so sad. To me, it was just the saddest thing. And as you say, the ancestors, the bones, they've been revered in many indigenous cultures, and it just shows you how far away we've become as a dominant culture, Western culture, how far we've come down a very, for me, dark path with that, when we can leave our ancestors hanging around in a cupboard. And sometimes they're never claimed. They're never claimed. So after a period of time, after exhaustive searches and trying to get somebody to claim them, if the funeral directors are unable to get anybody to finally claim them, then they will take them to the cemetery, where there's an area where ashes can be scattered. And so there, with no ceremony, no acknowledgement, and no other than what the funeral director, if that particular funeral director happens to have a spiritual leaning or not, whether they say anything or just get there, throw them out and go back, that's it. So it's quite extraordinary.
I think about the extraordinary, richness that you brought to this conversation, Carole, and it's powerful work. It's political and revolutionary in a sense, in many senses. But I'm thinking about how life is often cheapened. If it's not our life, not our life, but the people that are dying every day in Africa and in Europe and in New Zealand without food, without adequate nourishment, with no kindred contact. And their lives, if they're lucky, in an unmarked grave, but often not, just dumped into the local rubbish dump. I think about, what happens. I think about, I guess, the human resilience to make your way to the stars, to connect to kin, to withstand incredible adversity, domestic violence, cruelty, the sexual trade, and then eventual death. How there are also stories, numerous beyond what we can tell, that sit in this room too, that feed into the death narrative, how they fought, surrendered to death and survived, but that story doesn't get told because no one was witnessing it. So a key part of death seems to be about bearing witness to, and I'm using that in the richest way it could be possible, to another person you love, or someone you don't necessarily love, but you want to provide love for them. You may not love them personally, you may not know them personally, but you happen to be there on duty at that time.
Yes. Yeah, there's a beautiful organisation in San Francisco called the Sacred Dying Foundation, and they run a training program of which I've done called the No One Dies Alone program. And it is all about that, bearing witness for people that have no one to be with them. And it is something moving forward at some point in time. I would really like to see a way forward to bring the program into New Zealand, so that I have spoken to a number of nursing home staff about what happens, and even in the hospital, when people don't have family, when they are alone for whatever reason, or the family is too far away. And the staff do their best, but obviously they're on shift and things like this, and they have to go away. So I would really love to see an organisation like No One Dies Alone here, so that people can have somebody to come and sit with them if that's what's needed, to witness the passing, or to hold the space, to bring the love or the companionship or whatever it is that somebody may need in that moment. Yeah, I think it's but it is interesting what you say, that also too, in many places, many people are just dying and not honoured either. Actually, when I did my funeral training, it just reminded me, when I was doing funeral training, we had to do a funeral as part of the training, and I actually did a funeral for all the people in the world who'd never had a funeral. So, because I couldn't think of anybody to do a funeral for, and I thought, I don't want to do a funeral for someone who's not dying somehow or other, or dead. That it didn't feel quite right, like it just felt really strange. So in the end I thought I would do a funeral, and it ended up by being really, really poignant and powerful funeral for all the people in the world who've, for whatever reason, passing went unnoticed.
Can you remember particularly parts of that ritual that you did?
The one part that was really quite beautiful, I had bought a big bowl, and I had all these beautiful frangipanis, and I invited all the people who were at the ceremony, that were the other classmates. So everybody came up and floated a flower into the water, for somebody, and floated flowers into the bowl. It was really beautiful.
Somehow that image feeds something deep in us that transcends words almost, about death birthing life and death, the beautiful balance of all elements, and the intelligence of coming back into our own life with courage and hope.
And I think that's the thing that was always why death was in our homes and in our communities. It reminded us, it gave us that kick up the bottom that we needed to say, stop doodadding around, because look where you're going to go. This is you someday. And so, don't be just taking everything for granted. How about you actually pull your finger out and do something? And I think that was one of the gifts of death, and also where we're sadly missing that, because we've part of that realising that it's finite, that our time on the earth is finite, that the earth is finite, And I feel that somehow the separation from death somehow or other has also separated us from our understanding of that we cannot just keep taking from the earth and taking and taking and taking, and for there not to be some ramifications for those actions. And somehow or other I think it weaves into the same story. So not having death in our families, not seeing what that looks like, that is a good reminder that we too shall one day be lying in a casket. leaving, and you know, what are we leaving behind? This is the other big question, you know. Have we been on our, what have we been doing all this time? Taking? Are we on the take? We're all on the take. We're always taking something. We have to, you know, we have to take something. We take money from our employer, or we take money, we take food, we take, you know, we're on the take. What are we giving? What are we putting back? We're not even giving our body back to the earth. We're not even giving back. I love some of these really alternative arrangements that they're coming up with overseas. You can do composting. Your body can go into a composting system. I really quite like that idea. You can have, they have started some in New Zealand, the more natural burial grounds, where you're buried only in a shroud and much closer to the surface to allow trees and things to grow. I really like that concept. Because really at the end that's all we're going to give, this is all we've really got to give back. This is what we're riding round in, is all we've got to give back. That's about it. So, yeah.
And the memories,
and the
memories,
and the love.
Yeah.
But in the physical sense, we haven't got much. got much to give back.
You certainly give a lot of enchantment.
So, like, I just wanted to ask in brief, what do you think should happen in terms of integrating the knowledge and understanding of death and the processes involved back into our society?
It's happening. You'll be able to see if you do Facebook that there's a lot more coming up on Facebook feeds now around, they call it the positive death movement. I'm not keen on that language, but there is a lot more conversations. I believe as everything that happens in this world happened one decision at a time, one person at a time. I believe the reverse is that's how we're reversing back up. So things like death cafes, there's a real movement in death doulas becoming much more commonly aware of death midwives. Alternative funeral companies are starting to come to the fore. So I think the ball has started to gently roll, and more there is more starting. We need to get more into mainstream with hospitals and things, and I think it is all starting to happen, and I think it is just that there is a groundswell of people, and I believe that it is the way of spirit, how it works, is that I'm one of many people on this earth right now who was given this kind of calling, and so therefore all of us that heard and that have stepped up one step towards it are all working separately but somehow rather together to bring it all into being. And there's some people who are really leading visibly from the front, other people that are just quietly working away in their individual communities. Yeah, so I think that's how it happens, one person at a time.
I think I could talk forever too. Does this feel a time just to pause?
I think this sounds good. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
for your the joy you bring to the topic.
Oh, thank you.
Of being human, of the sanctity of life, and of the of the greater wisdom and spirituality around us that brings us together today. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.